here we are again for adult Bible study on Thursday nights at Roy Christian Church. Thanks for coming to join us. We're ready to start into a brand new book, but with a very similar story. So if you want to find 2 Samuel in your Bible, that's where we're going to pick up today in chapter 1. Just by way of very quick review, the last time we were together, a couple weeks ago, we finished the life and reign of King Saul, the Benjamite from Gibeah. He was wounded in battle against the Philistines, and because he didn't want to be captured and tortured, he fell on his own sword, ending his life. 3 of his 4 sons were also killed in the battle at Mount Gilboa, and so that leaves the way clear for David, anointed to be the king years and years earlier by Samuel, to finally take the throne of God's people. Super quick summary. I will say that if there's anything that you missed and you want to go back and take a look at again, it's all right there on YouTube. You can hunt that up. There are several different, what's the word I'm looking for? Playlists. It's across the top there, and there's a playlist for our study of King David. So let's read some in 2 Samuel chapter 1. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the 3rd day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked him, and he answered, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." "The men fled from the battle," he replied. "Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," the young man said, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me, and I said, 'What can I do?' He asked me, 'Who are you?' 'An Amalekite,' I answered. Then he said to me, 'Stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm, and have brought them here to my Lord." Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. We'll stop there at the end of verse 12. I believe, 2 Samuel chapter 1, that we should probably, the last time or two that we were together, talked a little bit more about the Amalekites. We talked a little bit about them, but it seemed to me like maybe they deserved a little more attention. So let's talk about them. The Amalekites are the descendants of a man named Amalek, who is the grandson of Esau. Esau is Jacob's twin brother. Jacob's the smooth homebody. Esau is the hairy outdoorsman, the sons of Isaac. Jacob became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Esau became the father of lots of people too, including the father of Amalek, and then the grandfather of him. So they are distant cousins. Jacob's people are the Israelites, the Hebrews. Esau's people are the Edomites, and under that the Amalekites. And they're all kind of, the Bible describes them in other places being like wild men. They're crazy people, kind of more wild than civilized, kind of like he was, wild, hairy nomads.
Bad?
They did not honor the God of Israel, for sure. So they live in the Negev, which is like here, all the way over to the Red Sea. So they kind of live in sort of wilderness areas. It's not lush, fertile farm ground. That's why they're nomads. They go from place to place, chasing water and things for their. They're out to get what they can get. We have seen them already in the last couple chapters, because it's Amalekite raiders that came up to Ziklag and captured everybody that was there, carried them all off into, they were going to sell them into slavery. They burned the city. David and his men came home and found that scene.
And then went after them.
Yes, and then they went after them. So just like Esau was at odds with Jacob, wanted to kill him, that's kind of the way the Amalekites are with Israel. The first time that we see this enmity between the Amalekites and the Israelites is as the Israelites are leaving Egypt during the Exodus. When they're coming out of Egypt and making their way up here to Canaan, to the Promised Land, the first people they encounter are the Amalekites at Rephidim, and you can read about that in Exodus chapter 17 if you want to make a note about that. The Hebrews encountered the Amalekites. The Amalekites treated them badly, tried to fight with them. And you may remember this story, but it's in the battle with the Amalekites that whenever Moses would put his staff in his hands and raise his hands up, the Israelites won. Whenever he put his arms down, the Amalekites were winning. Israelites, Amalekites, Israelites, Amalekites. So finally they decided, hey, let's rig this. So Aaron, his brother, and Hur, which I think is one of the sons of Aaron, I can't remember that one. But these two men came along, and they set Moses down on a rock, and they just held his arms up. So there's no chance that they're going to lose the battle. And
they'd get tired, wouldn't they?
Exactly. The Israelites ended up winning that battle because Moses' arms were upraised. At the end of Exodus chapter 17, it says, Moses said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. And so here we are.
That was in Exodus?
Exodus 17.
Okay.
And so here we are in 400 years later, roughly, 20 generations later, the Amalekites are still raging against and waging war against God and his people.
Oops.
Some things don't change.
They are for Esau.
They are the descendants of Esau's grandson, Amalek. All right, so just a little bit of background there. These are the kind of people that David has been fighting down in the Negev, in the wilderness, and they are kind of scattered all around. Because, not unlike today, just because you were an Amalekite didn't mean that you might not go want to live someplace else. So this man that we've read about is an Amalekite, but he's been living all over the place up here. The battle is up here in Mount Gilboa. Ziklag is down around here somewhere. That's 80 miles away. Which on foot is for a piece. So, all right. Back to chapter 1 here. David has been fighting After the raiders came and leveled Ziklag, the Israelites with David had a solid victory over the Amalekites. They hit it hard enough that 400 of them took off on their camels to get away. So here in verses 1 through 15, we're moving back to the story of David from the couple of chapters at the end of 1 Samuel, where we've covered the death of Saul in the battle with the Philistines. So David and his men are back in Ziklag. They have defeated the Amalekites, and so they've been back in the town for a couple of days to make sure that there is shelter for their families. Remember, that's who they were going after to rescue. They weren't just trying to punish the Amalekites. They were trying to get their wives and children and old parents or whoever had been taken away. They wanted to get them all back. So now they've come back to this burning, smoldering heap of a city, and they've got to make places for everybody to stay. They're busy. They've gone from being warriors to Corps of Engineers, Red Cross kind of guys. So,
CBs.
third day, while everybody's working, in comes dragging in a very worn out visitor. He comes to David and reports to David and his men that Saul is dead, that Jonathan and 2 of his brothers are also dead. This man is an escapee from capture. It's not clear when he says that he has come from the Israelite camp. It could mean a couple things. It could mean that somehow the retreating Israelites captured him and drug him along, which seems sort of unlikely, or that the Philistines had a camp full of Israeli captives and he kind of got scooped up in the net with them. But because he wasn't an Israelite, he was able to sneak away. That seems more likely. It probably doesn't matter a whole lot. But he has come from the battle site at Mount Gilboa. Again, there's 80 miles between Gilboa and Ziklag, and this man has covered that territory in less than 3 days, depending on how you do your math. He has been moving fast and hard to get to the other end of the valley in just 3 days' time. So when he gets there, probably in exhaustion, but also in a show of humility, this man falls to the ground in front of David. He is in torn clothes and dust on his head, which we'll talk about it again here in a minute. But he's kneeling before the anointed king, and so David begins to interrogate this man to get the full story. The Amalekite had been at Mount Gilboa. He had seen with his very own eyeballs King Saul. He had seen him wounded. He had seen him suffering and struggling after he had received some mortal, fatal injuries. But he was still alive and in his head enough, as we read a couple chapters ago, that he said to his armor bearer, look, if the Philistines find me, they're going to make my life miserable. I don't want to experience what they're going to put me through. End my life. I won't die before they get here otherwise. And the armor bearer said he couldn't possibly do that. King Saul got up enough energy to fall on his own sword, committing suicide, and that's what we see 2 chapters ago. Here, the story is a little bit different. The Amalekite says, well, I saw King Saul, And he was in a bad way. He was not going to make it. But he was good enough that he kind of propped himself up on his spear and said, hey, dude, come over here, stand over me and kill me because I'm going to die anyway. And so the Amalekite saw that that was true. He was going to die anyway. And so he acquiesced. He gave in to the request. So he stood over him and killed the king. Once Saul was dead, the Amalekite took his crown, probably not like the big crown that you imagine like Queen Elizabeth wearing all the time, but some kind of a little band that would be appropriate for a warrior, and a sort of an armband, an armlet, some kind of hoop that he would wear above his arm to show he was royalty, he was a warrior. So the Amalekite took those things and has carried them along to Ziklag to David. Apparently, David's work at appearing to be faithful to the Philistines has been pretty convincing, because this Amalekite comes thinking, hey, I got the crown, I got the armband, man, this new king of Israel is going to love me. He's going to, promote me. I'm going to get reward. This is going to be great. Because, the king is dead, long live the king. He doesn't seem at least in the least concerned that there's going to be any kind of retaliation. He actually seems pretty confident, pretty proud of himself. So some reward for bringing the message and for maybe helping the king, go to his maker earlier. But the reaction from David is very different than what was expected.
It says, then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan. Why did David react that way?
Okay, hang on.
Okay.
You're 2 paragraphs ahead of me.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So what I want to know is, as I'm reading this story from this Amalekite messenger, is he telling the truth?
Probably not.
Is he given the actual events, or has he taken what he saw and kind of tweaked it just enough that he's gonna get something? Because it doesn't match the account back in 1 Samuel 28, unless you believe that after Saul gets up and falls on his own sword, probably in a way that would have been effective, that somehow he has enough energy and enough life left in him that he can get up, prop himself up on his sword, lean over and be hollering across to this guy, hey, who are you? Come on over here. I need you to help me with something. Come stand here beside me. Where are you from anyway? I'm wounded, but I'm still alive. I need you to make me not that way. That seems like a bit of a stretch. It's a little more believable, and I think more consistent with human nature, that this Amalekite felt like, if I go to the new king with the crown and the armband of the old king and say, I killed the old king, man, there's going to be cash and prizes for me. I'll get whatever I want, because I'm ushering in a new administration. It's a whole new era for Israel. So here you go, David. Smiling, waiting, I don't know if he's telling the truth or not. I don't believe that he is, but he does have the crown. He does have the armband. So he really was there. He really did see Saul. That's funny. He really did see the king, and has some actual proof of it. It's probably more likely that he was one of the guys hiding behind a rock, hiding behind a bush, who watched it all happen from a distance and, in the time between Saul's death and the arrival of the Philistines, went over and snatched the royal jewelry. And so he gives the report, and instead of patting him on the head and saying, "Well done, good and faithful Amalekite, here's your reward, here's the cash prizes, here's a new donkey," whatever, there doesn't seem to be any of that. Instead, David and all of his men, how many of them are there?
4.
Do you remember?
Was there 400? 600. 600?
There were 400 that went to chase the Amalekites, 200 that stay home, 600 men. I mean, they are all faithful Israelites. They love David, but they love their nation. They, when they hear the news that the king is dead, that Jonathan, David's best friend, his brother in arms, is dead, that the Israelite army has scattered, and that the whole nation is kind of in disarray, not surprisingly, everybody kind of loses control. They start ripping their clothes and weeping and fasting. They fast all day long in honor of those who had died. To do those things, to rip your clothes and to fast and to weep and mourn, to throw dust on yourself, is not an uncommon practice in Hebrew culture. So let's talk a little bit about grief and mourning in the Bible. So the tearing of one's clothes is a very ancient tradition among the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites. And it goes along with mourning, grief, and loss. Anytime there is tragic bad news that comes, that is the reaction. They grab a hold of their sleeves and they tear them. They tear their shirts. Sometimes they tear specifically over their heart. They're showing that their heart is ripped open by what they've heard, what they've experienced. The first mention of somebody tearing their garments is way back in Genesis. In Genesis 37. It says, when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. Okay, that's when the 11 brothers, or 10 of them, dumped Joseph in the cistern. They were going to get rid of the brother, Joseph. Reuben was going to come back and set him free. And when he went back, there was no Joseph. And he was devastated that they had done this thing. A little bit later, Jacob tore his clothes when he got the news, and this fake murder robe that had been dipped in blood. He put on sackcloth and mourned for many days for his son when he thought Joseph was dead. You can go through the Bible over and over again. It happens. So we've got this instance here. David and his men tear their clothes and mourn and fast when Saul and Jonathan are killed. Elisha, the prophet, when Elijah, the prophet, was taken up into heaven, he tore his clothes. Job, when everything is taken away from him in Job chapter 1, he tears his clothes and fasts and mourns. Jephthah in Judges chapter 11. That's a tragic story. Jephthah makes a vow that sort of like, God, if you'll just get me home, if you'll just get us through this, I promise I will offer up to you as a sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my house. So as he comes home, out runs daughter.
Whoops.
And he tears his clothes and then completes the vow that he's made. Awful story.
I heard about that. You're tearing the clothes of the jazz singer.
Mordecai in the book of Esther, when he hears about Haman's plot to destroy the Jews, he rips his clothes. King Ahab, even though he was a total total awful human being, barely a human being. When he got bad news from Elijah about a judgment against him from God, he tore his clothes, even though he was a knucklehead. King Ahab,
Okay.
not the Arab.
Okay.
Paul and Barnabas in the New Testament, when they are worshipped by the people of Lystra as some kind of Greek gods, they tear their clothes. Okay, so it's not an uncommon thing. Bad things happen. There's loss. There's grief. There's deep sadness. We start making rags. Sometimes the tearing of the clothes would be accompanied by throwing dust or ashes on yourself. Sometimes they would shave their heads in a display of grief and humility. They would take off their rags and put on worse rags. They'd go all the way from ripped clothes down to burlap sacks, to where all of those actions are intended to communicate everybody around them that this person is in deep grief and mourning. Okay?
So why is David grieving Saul?
Because he loved Saul. He loved Jonathan for sure. Absolutely, he loved Jonathan.
Yeah.
But he grieved Saul because he and Saul had a significant thing in common. They were both anointed by Samuel under God's direction to be the king of God's people. So
it doesn't matter that Saul kept after him.
Well, that's why I was wondering.
he never.
Yeah.
We never get the indication anywhere that David hated Saul. Mostly it was like, what? I don't get this. Why are you chasing me?
Right.
I'm really not a threat to you. Why do you keep coming after me?
But he would have mourned Jonathan.
Oh, absolutely.
It's him and Jonathan.
I think that he had this guy killed for two reasons: for daring to.
We're not there yet. We stopped at 12. You're getting ahead, Cody. Hang on. We're almost there.
Okay.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, we haven't gotten that far. I don't know what you're talking about. It hadn't happened yet. Spoiler alert. So, David...
Well, apparently I don't know what I'm talking
Well,
about.
okay.
David and his men have a lot to grieve. Their king, the leader of their nation, has been killed in battle. Jonathan and his two brothers, the majority of the rest of the royal family, have also been killed in the battle. I mean, it would be like, you have to go back a ways to find an appropriate illustration in American history. Probably like if it wasn't just John Kennedy, but all of the Kennedy family was all wiped out in one fell swoop there in Dallas. You know, it was bad enough how America mourned JFK's death. Just imagine how tragic it would have been if all the rest of the family had been taken out as well. So they're grieving that, but they also know that the Israelite army got their rear end kicked. They ran away from the fight. Their former brothers in arms, men, probably cousins and brothers, are fleeing for their lives, and the whole nation is going to be affected. Okay, so this really is a massive deal. There is a lot to grieve, and so there is a lot of emotion. How could they not be affected in a fairly significant way? And so it's potentially true that so they spent the whole day not eating, not drinking, just moving from place to place, you know, hugging each other, crying with each other, sitting around the fire saying, I just can't believe that this has happened. And so finally David continues to talk to this Amalekite and says, so in verse 13.
But this guy doesn't have a name that came to David.
No.
He's just a guy.
He's just an Amalekite.
Young man.
Okay.
David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" I am the son of a foreigner and Amalekite, he answered. David asked him, why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Okay, so the young man says he is an Amalekite, but he has been living as an Israelite. He's been living among God's people, and by the laws given to the Israelites by God, he enjoys some of the privileges of living with God's people, but not all of them. Okay, but he knows he's been a part of the culture long enough to understand how things are supposed to work. And so the question is, if you're a resident of Israel, you understand that God selected and anointed the king. Why were you not afraid to raise your hand against him? If you've been living in Israel, you should have known better than to touch the king, let alone kill him. So what he's done is not just like a political crime, but this is also a religious crime. He has raised his hand against God's expressly determined will and plan and purpose. Even if Saul was a bonehead and was rebellious and had huge flaws and had failed as God's leader, he still was the anointed king by God. And so, because of that, David acts as judge and jury. Then David called one of his men and said, this is verse 15, go strike him down. So he struck him down and he died. For David had said to him, your blood be on your own head, your own mouth testified against you when you said, I killed the Lord's anointed. This man deserved death for his capital crime, and David passes sentence on him with an immediate execution.
Even though possibly he didn't do that. He said that
By his own mouth.
Okay.
The Amalekite was guilty and deserving of this kind of justice. Okay? David is the king. This man is an enemy of the Lord, both because he's an Amalekite, because of what we read earlier tonight, and also because he has struck down King Saul.
And taken his possessions.
True. The Amalekite has proudly confessed his deeds. Look what I can do. Look what I did. He's looking for a praise. And so the death sentence is handed down and immediately carried out. The blood that has been shed was the cause of the blood that was about to be shed. If you don't like that, what goes around comes around. Or you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I mean, there's multiple little maxims that fill in here. It may seem kind of harsh to us because we don't know if he really did it, but he was telling everybody that he did.
You would have said that.
Thinking that he was going to get...
Wait, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I lied, I told a story. I'm sorry, you're dead.
Too bad you're too late.
Yeah.
There were no witnesses to the suicide.
Well,
Because his what was the guy called? His buddy?
the armor bearer?
Yeah, he killed himself too.
If you would have just said he just found him dead.
He'd have lived. He'd have lived.
There is no room for negotiating when you raise your hand against God's will.
Okay, so now can I say what I was thinking?
Yes, you can take it.
I think the guy totally misunderstood the relationship between Saul and David.
No.
Because Saul was always chasing after David. I think he figured David hated
Yeah.
Saul too. So he would get rewarded for taking him out.
Yeah, he's just won the showcase showdown. He's going to get a trip to Puerto Vallarta and a new car and whatever else. He's looking for reward.
Yeah,
I watched a little old Bob Barker Price
Okay.
is Right when I was
We
on
figured
the
that's
trip.
where it came from. But only us old people would understand that.
Yeah, well, we're all well experienced people here. That is a swift, painful, ouchy story. There's probably some real lessons to be learned there, like don't take credit for something you didn't do. For one, that seems a little overblown, but it's true. And you might, be very careful when you think you're going to expect a pat when you're going to get a chop.
Beheading.
Yeah.
Well, and what God has decided, you don't mess with.
Even if it seems like a great idea. Even if everybody else is in agreement, because I'm confident that anybody around there would have said, yeah, finish him off. And if David had been around, they would have all been laying dead on the ground as well in a minute. So.
It's all in the plan, huh? For David to be king, it had to be this way. The guy didn't have to die, but because of Saul and all his men dying and everything, that was the only way David was going to get to be king, right?
Right. Saul at Saul's death, David was going to be the king. Period. Because God said, "Hey, guess what? You're going to be the king."
How long did he know? Did he know?
It's been years.
Okay.
Maybe 10.
But David didn't know how that was going to happen. Did he know that it was going to be because of Saul's death and how Saul was going to die? Did David know all that?
I don't know that he had that information. Just that he would be the king after Saul.
Well, I think because of the way one kingship passes from one to another, I think he knew that it would be after his death, but I don't think he anticipated all the stuff that was gonna happen in between. Because part of his lament all the way through is, why are you doing this to me, Saul? So that went along for a long time. He never made any move to take Saul out because those same two reasons. He loved him, and it was God's anointed. It didn't matter that David was also. He wasn't his time yet.
Yeah. All along, all during all that hot pursuit through the wilderness, David had opportunity to finish the fight, and he refused to do what this little punk foreign boy was willing to do, just like that.
Away with words.
I'm a wordsmith. I just can't help it.
Yeah. And apparently he didn't have a name, so he wasn't important.
In the credits, he is dead Amalekite #1. So.
You shall remain nameless.
That's right. Okay, so let's pick up in verse 17. So after all of this story and the execution of this little twerp,
In the morning,
David begins to sing a lament. A lament expresses deep grief and emotion. Clearly, there's a lot of that raging through Ziklag. He is affected by the death of these men that he knew and loved and was related to as well. Don't forget that. But he also sees that Israel is really in a bad way now. I mean, the king is dead, the Philistines have invaded, and the army is on the run. What's going to happen to Israel? And so he expresses, as he is wont to do in other places, with all this great emotion, by singing this lament, a death dirge for the royal family. It is apparently called the Lament of the Bow. That was the title it was given. And he said that it is a song, the Lament of the Bow.
It says in mine, the lament of the bow.
Some Bibles have that in quotation marks, but not all of them do. I think it's appropriate that that's the title of it. So, and he wanted this song to be taught to all the men of Judah. It's not to all the men of Israel, because it would still be a little while before he would be the king of all Israel. But he's definitely going to be the king of Judah for a little bit. So all these soldiers that have been with him, all of these fellow tribesmen, they're going to serve where David is going to reign, and so he wants them to know this song well. Okay, so let's we'll go through it bit by bit here. David took up lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar. A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you neither have dew nor rain, may no showers fall on your terraced fields, for there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. In verse 18, the book of Jashar is mentioned. The name means the book of the upright. It's also referred to in Joshua chapter 10, verse 13. Apparently, the book of Jashar is a collection of poems that commemorate significant events and significant actors or heroes in Israel's history. This book does not survive. Nobody has ever seen it. It is lost to the ages. There was a forgery put together in the 800s that resurfaced again in the 1700s, but it's bogus. So this book of the upright, where all of Israel's greatest heroes are sung about, doesn't exist anymore. Verse 19, a gazelle. That is a reference to the royal dignitary. That is somebody who has a special seat, somebody who is extremely special. I don't know if you picked up that there is a phrase mentioned 3 times, how the mighty have fallen. Now, I've said that for 45 years.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I ever really knew that it probably has Old Testament roots. But David hits it 3 times there. Verse 19, verse 25, verse 27.
They use it all the time. No, I didn't know that either.
Verse 20, the bitter defeat of Israel by her enemies isn't something that should be broadcast. We don't want to make this a big news story. The places that are mentioned there are towns in Philistia. He doesn't want to give those uncircumcised dogs any kind of a reason to celebrate. This is an embarrassment and a sad story, and we don't want them to have a party at our cost. Verse 21, David's laying down some very heavy language. It could be considered a curse. Essentially, what's going on in this verse is that what happened at Mount Gilboa in that battle is so very tragic and so awful and horrible that nature itself should mark the events by remaining barren. No rain, no dew, no plants, no nothing, no farming. It ought to all just stay dead. This is such an awful thing. There's a mention there in that verse about a shield rubbed with oil. Any guesses to what that is a reference to? Why that's significant?
Well, Spirit of the Lord into the situation. And so by not doing it, we don't even want the Spirit of the Lord here.
Well, the Spirit has departed. Because who had been anointed? Saul. And now, Saul, the one who carried this shield anointed with oil, is gone. He's dead. And so the anointed one is he's gone now. So there, I suppose David is saying in a roundabout way that there is no anointed leader of Israel now. Sort of. Verses 22 and 23, David talks about Saul and Jonathan as warriors, that they are swifter than eagles and stronger than lions, that they had bow and sword. But these men themselves, by the end of the chapter, he says that the men are the weapons of war, not their bow and sword. But those weapons were effective and powerful and didn't come back unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan were mighty warriors and had been victorious in battle after battle. Verse 24. The royal warriors, Jonathan and Saul, are also praised as having been noble and a blessing to their people. What gives us that indication? What is it that it says that they brought to the people, especially to the ladies?
Scarlet and finery and ornaments of gold.
Okay. Beautiful fabrics, ornaments, jewels, gold, fine things. To kind of go back to JFK, as Saul and Jonathan increased and had success, the whole nation, all the boats rise. Okay. All of Israel was blessed and benefited by what they had done. There was food to eat, there were clothes to wear, and so the death of these men is not just a loss to the noble family; it is a big loss for the whole nation. Not just a military defeat, but it is a slap against everybody, young and old, male and female.
And they're still mad about it.
Probably.
And they're still mad about it, Israel.
Verses 25 and 26. This is where one of the dumber understandings of Scripture comes about. There are a lot of people who read these verses that David sings and make the assumption that your love is more wonderful to me than that of women. Clearly, they were bisexual, that Jonathan and David were lovers.
That is not the first thing that popped into my mind when I read that.
But there are people who say, see, it's right there in the Bible. Homosexuality is okay.
Now,
That
wait
is
a minute.
not.
No, there's a lot of people that
What?
point to different, even Saul, when
Sure.
what he loves is, his disciples, because they're like his sons, and they point to that.
Right.
See, he was homosexual.
So we can also interpret this that war was good and that people were killed. We can also interpret it any way we want
Oh, yeah.
to
Serve our purpose.
serve our purpose.
Yeah.
I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. Okay? David is not commenting on a physical, sexual relationship or a romantic, emotional bond.
He says, my brother.
Commenting on all of the stuff that happened in one sense.
Okay? David and Jonathan are not lovers. They are both married men. And David is a serial marrier. He has multiple wives and will have even more. He has multiple children. He gets in trouble not for a homosexual relationship, which doesn't exist, but he gets in trouble because he's going after somebody else's wife. He loves the ladies, clearly. I think anybody who looks at this and says, well, David and Jonathan were clearly in a gay romantic relationship.
Because they want to justify what's
are
going on in the
all
world
wet.
and saying it's in the Bible. That makes it okay.
So when he says more wonderful than that of women, he's not apparently just talking about his current 2 wives. I believe his mother is a woman.
Yes.
His grandmother is a woman. You know, what he found in a relationship with Jonathan was so very different than anything that he had found with any other human, actually. He is his brother in arms. Jonathan was faithful and loyal and self-sacrificing. He put his own life at risk to protect David's life from his father. And when he talks about love, he's not talking about romantic entanglement.
No, this is so far beyond.
He's talking about what one scholar called covenantal loyalty. They made a pact way back in 1 Samuel 18. They were more than friends. They were more than brothers. They're more than blood brothers. They have made an oath to each other before God. And so, you know, this is a deep, deep relationship. This isn't just somebody I hang out with and go drinking and telling stories with. This is a guy that I'm willing to die for because I know he would do the same thing for me.
And people have those relationships today.
Yeah.
And it's not sexual.
Lots of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. They have those kind of connections to the guys that they serve with.
I was just going to bring that up. There are military buddies that go, and the relationship goes far beyond even what your wife understands.
And far beyond the color of your skin.
Because you know, a group of guys, especially in combat, go through something together that cannot be understood by anybody else.
All right, friends, I've got a little bit more here, but we're going to pause it. So that's mostly the end of 2 Samuel 1. I do have some more things for us to talk about. You know, we've been able to pull in other things from the Old Testament that seem to fit in, especially Psalms. So there's a psalm that I want us to look at the next time we get together before we move on to chapter 2 of 2 Samuel. All right? That'll be it for now. Thanks for being here. Go back and check it again, see if I did anything weird. Bye.